entitled Geekery's attempts at playing solo Dungeons & Dragons, also known from here on in as Adventures in Alterra. This is episode 0, where some background of what is happening here in this podcast and what the intention of it is, and where it is going, and any plans for the future. First of all, I would like to say that my real name is Tanya. I have been a player of Dungeons & Dragons since, 1996, I would say. I started GMing shortly after that. I began playing D&D as a cross between LARPing and tabletop gaming. For those of you who don't know, a LARP is live action role play where you act out your character in real life as opposed to describing what you are doing. You get dressed up, you pick up fake weapons, and you go out searching for adventure. That shifted to tabletop play, just taking the characters I invented in the grassy fields and then putting them to paper. I played both first and second edition, though the second edition I played was kind of a cross between second edition and its updated rules at that time, which was called Skills and Powers. Skills and Powers was sort of optional rules. It was literally actually a set of books that just said optional rules, and there were several of them that were produced. But they both all allowed point-based play and high customization rather than a set number of skill slots and limited choices on custom characters and races. That eventually gave way to 3rd edition, which is far more like 5th edition used today. In fact, I even have many of my books, since you can just use much of the information out of them just as it is. Have I ever played 4th edition D&D? No. I picked up the books and gave them a once-over, and I just went, pass. Yeah, if you like it, cheers to you, but it really wasn't for me. Now, as of this recording, it is several months into COVID-19 pandemic, and, well, I haven't sat at a game table in months, pretty much ever since it started. I, quite frankly, need to roll some dice and go on some grand adventures, but even my fellow gamers are kind of finding it hard to keep online games going right now. Stress is kind of sapping all of us, and it's hard to get a day and time when we're all comfortable playing. So, that has led me down the solo D&D path. What is solo D&D? Well, you are one player and you're one character, and you go on adventures just like you normally do. In some cases, you have one player and one game master, but in my case, I am both player and game master. I will be running, well, me through these scenarios as me, myself, and I. Are these choose your own adventure paths? Well, no, not really. I don't entirely like that style of play because most of the time you're given a limited number of choices of what to do next in a situation, and I like to have a more fluid style of play. I might think of something that the writer of the Choose Your Own Adventure that's been written might not think of, and it kind of puts me in a box as to what I can do. And I don't really like being put in boxes. So, what will be happening is that I will be searching for some solo 5th edition adventures and then picking them up for the very first time and simply playing them. I haven't read the adventures as they are written, and I will just be playing them as I read them. Well, at least that's the plan. If things don't quite feel right as I'm reading the adventure, I can always have my character abandon the quest. Because, well, let's face it, who goes out in search of adventure looking to get themselves hurt or maimed or captured? No one. I mean, yeah, okay. You're looking for excitement, sure, but you kind of know when you can take on a goblin, but a dozen of them? Nope. Pass. Well, as the song says, you gotta know when to hold 'em and know when to fold 'em. At some point, I will also be making some tables for random adventures. Making tables has been something that I've been doing for years as a GM. It really wasn't all that long when I started playing D&D when I actually just started GMing D&D. Most of the people who I had been playing with had literally been playing for decades at that point. Pretty much as soon as um, D&D books existed, they had actually been playing Dungeons and Dragons long before there were any campaign settings or hard rules or even descriptions of some of the character races. Um, they they had been GMing for entirely too long and kind of quickly passed the torch to me. So it really wasn't long before I was making up my own random tables and charts because a lot of times we just sort of grabbed the monster manual and just started playing random adventures with a random map and just open up a page to the monster manual and said here we are. So I have actually all kinds of tables and charts and things that I will be using while I'm playing. Um, but I will actually be making a giant set of sort of randomly generated adventure paths for my character. Well, so who am I going on adventures with? Well, I'm glad you asked. I shall be playing the elf noble Leor de Automne de Elf de Bois. Uh, Forgive my butchering of the language. Okay, so a little bit on the background of Luar and where they come from. Luar hails from the elven realm of Terre de, uh, sorry, Terre ou le soleil de lune de se reconcent. Commonly called Salune by many who don't have any particular desire to say the full name its entirety, or like me, you're really, really rusty with the language. Um, Nuar is the third son of the Queen of Salune, which is co ruled by a brother and sister who have families of their own. So there are actually two sets of royal families in the major elven kingdom of the world of Alterra. A king and queen. They have completely equal power, and they are both married and they both have children, and they share power equally, and they wear magical crowns which allow them to telepathically communicate with each other whenever they desire. That is actually a set of artifacts that I kind of borrowed from second edition Dungeons and Dragons. Um, I quite frankly loved them as an actual artifact. So many artifacts that were written for D&D and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons over the years are just they're just honestly awful. But those elven crowns of rulership were just absolutely amazing and beautiful and perfect for what I had in mind for elves. So, those who are familiar with settings of Dungeons and Dragons, you will find this as kind of unfamiliar, even though there will be some flavors of familiar things to be found. That's because all of this that I am using is from a campaign setting that I have created that is called Novalis. The world itself is called Alterra. It is one that I have been developing for a very long time, and I have yet to finish and publish it, but I also aim to change that. The My Novalis book is currently sitting at 45 8.5 by 11 pages of text, just text. Um, and I haven't really started adding tables and charts, and yes, there will be tables and charts. I have created I have created seasons and calendars, and oh, it has been a lot of fun working on this campaign setting for, quite frankly, 20 years, honestly. My original map, I drew on MS Paint in like Windows 96. Oh, yes. Anyway, um, the kingdom of Solune resides on the what I tend to consider the westernmost continent, even though it is in fact a continent on a spherical globe. I know that some campaign worlds actually do kind of have flat worlds. Mine is not. The elves that reside within the ancient forest kingdom have done so since the very beginning, when their people were first brought to life by the powers that created the world itself. Uh, when they were first came into being, they were essentially Stone Age people. They they learned stone tools and had rough hides as clothing at the start of their existence, and a lot of that really changed very little for millennia. The Some of the very first elves essentially sort of became gods, which then taught their younger kin things like uh, metal smithing, weapon creation, animal husbandry, forest stewardship is a major thing with elves, which honestly I think has kind of gotten lost over the years. The elves are almost no longer forest stewards, and that is kind of bothered me a little bit. And that I for my own campaign world, I sort of wanted to come back to that. I wanted to come back to sort of a storybook version of elves that live in trees and have houses and branches and have magical stairways with shimmering lights to light up the night. And it's just I just I wanted that. I wanted fairy elves, and I like the fact that fifth edition D&D has kind of gone back to fairy elves. I genuinely appreciate that a lot. That's why I'm playing fifth edition D&D. Besides the fact that D&D Beyond has made things so very easy to do, with character creation and keeping everything all in one place, that you can just you can create all of your own homebrewed items, and you can keep your characters all in one location. You can just bring them all up digitally. It's a phenomenal tool, and I love it. And I just adore it. And uh, I absolutely had to have like fairy elves, and that is what my character, my noble elf prince, is. He is a fey elf, because his noble lineage is a bit stronger in its fey bloodline than some of the others, which will hopefully sort of, the tale of which will be told as all of these adventures unfold. Um, anyway, so no one within the world itself is entirely certain when modern history really began, although there have been attempts at record keeping. But when you're actually dealing with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, and when there are no writing systems, it can be rather difficult. Um, so the fairy world and the world of Alterra hadn't did not exist together. No one is entirely certain when it happened, but at some point before recorded history, a barrier was broken, and the world of the fairy, the dimension actually of the Fae, began to merge with Alterra, and much of that has happened within the actual kingdom of Solune. And as such, the trees, the oaks and the maples and the aspens are utterly enormous, and it has the realm itself almost has a frosted sort of unearthly hue about it that it seems strange and fantastic. And there are beings that sometimes are even more ancient than elves that reside there. When the fairy realm began to bleed into Salune, sprites, fauns, centaurs, gremlins began to emerge from beyond the realm and settled into elven woodlands. High, the high fae, the ones that we kind of think of with Oberon and Titania, they came to the elven people and were greeted with reverence and friendship. Uh, Although to say that, but not all fae are good and just, and many are spiteful and wicked. The fae laws are nothing like the laws of men and elves, and clashes are inevitable. Um, Eventually, everything would sort of fall into place, and Solune would reside in relative peace. And the fairy realm exists simultaneously within Alterra. The two worlds separated with a magical veil that can occasionally be parted, and the two worlds can just mingle together. This is the world where my character Luara de Autumne knows. Although there is much more out within the world of Alterra, he just has yet to see any of it. To the north, there are dwarven kingdoms. To the south lies a mighty empire, largely composed of humans. Relations with all the peoples are well enough, although some troubles do lie to the north. Um, Not necessarily with the dwarves, though. It's uh, it's interesting. There's a little darkness that lies within the mountains of the dwarves, but not from the dwarves themselves. That has more to do with the history of dwarves and elves that will eventually be unraveled as we go on. Luora doesn't really have any extensive knowledge of any of this. Uh, they aren't going to be crowned ruler. They are not next in line to succeed to the throne, so they really have no need or desire to stay within the capital city and learn how to rule. Although they have actually been sort of trapped within the palace walls, and they've seen the same trees and the same rocks and the same rivers for entirely too long. They want to have some meaning to what they want, to what they're doing as a noble, and seek out into the unknown. Uh, Luar is indeed a prince. His pronouns are he or they. Honestly, I tend to lean more toward gender neutral, because they don't really think of themselves in any particular fashion. I think that kind of has more to do with the Fey ancestry, honestly. Um, Fairies themselves tend to be exceedingly androgynous. In some cases, they are indeed hermaphroditic. So he doesn't really care. Honestly, he doesn't think of himself in sort of any gender way whatsoever, although their title is prince. Prince in a very ancient sense. The original root word in French for prince actually had no gender connotation whatsoever attributed to it. It eventually it led to mean a male child of the monarch, but it used to at one point just mean child of a king or a high nobleman. So that is pretty much how I'm using it. I'm using it in that context. Whenever I say prince, I don't necessarily mean a male nobleman. I just kind of mean a high ranking nobleman, a child of a high ranking nobleman in that sense. Uh, so, Dua, their mother finally relented when he kind of kept badgering for to just be able to just go out and do his own thing to have a purpose. He is certainly an adult now, and as prince, he does indeed have certain duties that can be performed. One of these is as an ambassador or a representative of the royal family when the need arises. And right now, there is a temple along the east coast of Salune that is getting a new leader. The king and the queen cannot attend the ceremony of the passing of holy sacraments from one minister to another, but Luar would be perfect for the task. They seek a quest, and this certainly seems a fitting duty to perform. It will require a bit of travel, so perhaps they can attend to this wanderlust that they have developed and see more of the kingdom. More about my character. He is indeed a first level ranger, wearing a fine set of clothing and prepared for combat. Wears a breastplate not of steel like a human would wear, but of bronze wood. Bronze wood is an exceedingly hard wood that grows deep within the elven forest. When sheets of the wood are delicately shaved and carved into shapes, it has the same hardness as metal. It is extremely costly, but also lighter than metal of its type. The armor weighs 18 pounds versus the normal 20 pounds a normal steel plate would weigh. Bronze wood is uh, sort of my one of the things that I had actually pulled from third edition D&D, because this is actually sort of elven blood mixing with Fey so many millennia ago. They cannot comfortably touch iron. They can't. It is a trait among that all Fey share, is that they are essentially allergic to iron. Iron is exceedingly toxic to them. Well, the problem with steel objects is that steel contains iron. So no elf will actually have equipment containing steel. This is a major thing actually in Salune, is that steel is exceedingly rare to find. And if you do find steel, it will be what is kind of today considered white metal. It is actually steel that doesn't actually contain iron. Today we would call it stainless steel, which would be steel that doesn't actually contain iron. It is not ferrous. It also does not rust, which is one of the things about elven steel that humans love, is that their steel does not rust, and they kind of consider it magical, because because it doesn't rust. Well, it's just because it doesn't contain any iron. Um, it is still rare. It is still very expensive, and quite frankly, most of the metals that elves use are either precious metals, copper, silver, gold. Um, Bronze is actually their major metal that they use. Luar actually carries a pair of bronze short swords with a short bow and a quiver of arrows. He was originally given a longbow, which I have since changed on his character sheet. Because, okay, realistically, you're really not going to use a longbow in forest settings or even dungeon settings. A longbow is meant to shoot a great distance. And when you're dealing with heavy forest and tight turns and small spaces, you're not going to be using a longbow. A longbow is a 5 foot to 6 foot long piece of wood. You can't just crouch down. It's as long as an actual quarterstaff. I mean, an actual English longbow is as long as a quarterstaff would be. So it's just not it's just not useful in a dungeon setting at all. So I'm like, no, get rid of that longbow. He has a short bow. Also, elven fashion is very flowy right now. Long robes, heavy embroidery, layers of translucent fabrics are especially common among nobility, although Luire keeps it a bit more practical. Clothes of elven silk or fine wool when it is cooler, and imported cotton and linen in the heat. Uh, Elves in Solune also have a very special trees that have seed pods that have these long flax-like fibers that sort of wrap around the seeds and inside of the pod. It kind of looks like a version of a milkweed pod, but it's hard like a coconut. And these trees actually create this fiber on the inside of the nut, and that is actually elven silk. Elves don't actually have true silk, which is spun from the cocoons of silkworms. That is an Eastern imported product, which is exceedingly expensive. Not that elves don't love imported silk, but it's not the same. It's actually closer to what imported linen from the South would be like. Um, and they tend to sort of, they often will even mix imported silk threads with the elven silk to create a mix of the two. Um, Elves also will grow out their hair long, but they often tuck it up into braids and curls when working. Luau tends to keep their autumn colored locks loose, but will ensure that braids of hair and ornament clips keep strands from getting in the way. If he knows he's going into battle, he will actually take his hair and sort of twist it up into the back of his head like a bun. And they will have like a little ribbon to tie the hair in place. He also tends to wear colors that coordinate with the seasons. Where his typical, when he actually isn't wearing bronze wood, he will wear a leather scale mail that is color coordinated. At some point, I also want to get a set of leaf weave armor for him. Leaf weave is an armor also from a third edition arms and equipment manual that is made from a special ivy that grows, and elves treat it, and it becomes leather-like in its consistency, and they make layered leather armor out of it, even, but it's literally just leathery ivy leaves, and you can create suits that are either green, like in the spring and summer months, or when the leaves start to turn red and orange in the fall, they will create suits of armor that are red and orange. He wants to have, he literally, he is in a nobleman in such a sense that they will absolutely like have different sets of armor for whatever they feel necessary that they should have it for, and wearing green in spring and summer, and browns and reds and oranges for for the fall. He is absolutely like that. They're kind of obsessed with clothing a little bit. They don't like to carry a lot of clothing pieces with them, but they like to collect clothing. It's sort of a thing. I'm actually kind of hoping that he will be able to actually just collect bits of clothing and trinkets and jewelry, as they travel, hopefully around the world, uh, and to just collect things like that. Um, but at the moment, his mother has a quest for him, to basically represent the family, as a high temple along the eastern coast. Uh, it is an important temple. It is a temple where the first rays of the sun from the east, strike it in the Elven Kingdom. It is the easternmost point in the Elven Kingdom, which is exceedingly important, for the sun's rays, as it first as the sun rises, over the horizon, that it strikes this temple first, and it is important, to the elves of the day, um, which I rather hope to get into, more of the elven culture later on. But for now, that is the setup for Adventures in Alterra. And next session will be session 1, where we actually, sort of start on the adventure. The adventure that I have chosen, I will actually include the title, who wrote it, where it is available, and I will also include, links to it. It was actually a free download, from Drive Through, RPG. And if you have actually any solo D&D adventures that would potentially be useful to, me and my noble elf ranger, or even solo D&D adventures that might be useful later on, as I want to get into the dwarven kingdoms and the jungle kingdoms to the south, and even to locations to the east, and maybe even the fairy realms. We shall see. And Gua is ready to travel east along a well sailed river and off to adventure.